Fabulous. Yeah, so like I said, just International Men's Day came to mind that, I hadn't realized that this was coming up, and you were the first person that I thought about when I saw. And I wanted to ask you, what's going on with this? Like, what is International Men's Day? What should we be thinking about as women who lead? How can we support men? What's the real deal? What's going on here?
Yeah, and that's kind of it's a tricky question, because women have been supportive of men for a long time now, right? So it's kind of that double-edged sword of, trying to tell women to support men continuously, which they always done for the most part, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's good for, and I guess I'll use a story. When I was at a women's conference in New York City, probably about 5 years ago, and women were talking about, their lack of awareness around kind of the man box culture, right? So really about how strong the patriarchy is.
Yeah.
And we started going around and sharing. One of the things I shared is that even in my journey, even when if I get in an argument with my spouse or something, and I walk in the other room, and I'm like, why am I acting this way? And I have this little voice in my head saying, well, you need to go let her know that this isn't okay. Like, that you apologize, that you're overreacting, but it's like, then I have this other voice saying, but she'll think you're less than a man.
Wow.
And I've actually had this conversation with her and said, just let you know, like, and she's heard me tell this story, and she always comes up and gives me a hug, and she's like, I don't think less of a man, but it's because I'm in my 50s, right? I've had it ingrained that I can't show weakness, right? That tears, it was interesting. I just read an article about how, we see professional sports athletes. So American football, we see there's an article around, I think it was on ESPN or the Times, around how when men are losing a game or win a game, it's okay for them to cry, but it's not okay for them to cry off the field.
Yeah.
Right. So we have this interesting dichotomy where there are some instances where it's appropriate for men to cry. And I think for me, it's really about bringing awareness, for men to be aware that this isn't a course you're going to take, right? It's not a pill you can take. It's something that has been constructed for centuries, right? And it was interesting. There was a movie called The 300, which is about Leonidas and the 300 Romans, right? And what's fascinating to me was I use that as an example of how leading a country or a nation could be. There's a scene in the beginning of the movie when a messenger comes to tell Leonidas he needs to come to the god king or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And the queen speaks, and the messenger's like, how dare a woman speak? And she basically said, well, only a woman can produce warriors. So how dare you question that a woman can speak? And then when he's about to kill the messenger, he turns to the queen for her permission. Like, at one point in time, there was a balance, and that balance got thrown.
Yes.
And it's not that we can't get there, because we've been there before.
Yes.
A long time ago, right? And it's not that women are trying to take over, right? If you look back on history, the Amazonian women were some of the fiercest warriors in the world.
Yeah.
And the only reason that they ended up disappearing was because of their numbers, not because of their skill. So I use that as an example to talk about how it's not that women are smarter or better. It's a different perspective. Yeah. So when you look at countries in EMEA, right, that have 50% or so leadership from women, they're moving, their infrastructure is moving quickly. Yeah. In the United States, while our infrastructure is failing, it's because it's built on the minds, not on the backs, but on the minds of mainly white men.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we all know that men are, let's fix it as quickly as possible, right? We need to have that diversity of thought. So this isn't about an attack on men. It's about how do we make more positive changes, and how do we open it up to hear that diversity of thought and move. There's actually I got connected with this woman in Spain, and I can't remember when, it was about 3 years ago, was working on a documentary around prostitution. And it was really, for whatever reason, I decided to become involved in it. And I've kind of gone back and forth with her, and she just finished the pilot will be coming out, or the trailer will be coming out in a few weeks, and I'll send it to you. But it's called Exit. It's about women leaving the prostitution, and there's a line in there that really stuck with me. Is that, and I actually wrote it down because it was so impactful to the overall. Oh, here it is. So there's a thing where it said, human trafficking has a heart, and its heart is men who pay for sex. And that's what it boils down to. Like, it's women have still always been put in this very box. And you look at Zoom, I can wear like a sweater, throw on a sport coat, I have short hair, just put a little gel in my hair, I'm good to go, right? Whereas women continuously, and that's why in our company, I say, if you don't have to be on video if you don't want to be on video.
Yeah.
Because it's a totally different look and feel. And then some people we have some folks on our team that are physically not well, like they're sick, they might have COVID, but they still want to, like, even though we've said to them, listen, you don't have to work, they still feel like, well, but I'm not on camera. I'm like, that's fine. Like, you wouldn't be in the office if you weren't feeling well. And if you still want to join the meetings, that's up to you. It's not a requirement, but if you don't want to be on camera, you don't have to. So we have to be able to change how we're talking about masculinity, right? And move from a shaming and blaming to a more supportive stance for other men to support each other as well. And I mean, again, I have a really hard time talking about women supporting men because they've been doing something. I mean, women have been code switching for so long to fit into the masculine world.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, how do we ask for more?
I mean, you're saying so many things. What you're presenting is so rich, and everything you say brings another thought and another thought and another thought. I guess, and where I'm at with this is that when I first heard about International Men's Day, I just felt this real familiar. It felt, if I'm honest, I'm just being very vulnerable here.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
If I'm honest, I just felt like here are the men who are going, hey, how come they get to have a day and we don't get to have a day? Like, we're having a day, because, and I think that in itself is how masculinity and male domination has felt to me. It's felt like it just needs to be up on top. It needs to be, and who do they think they are having a day and we don't have a day? Like, we need a day. Like, so that's what I first thought. But then I read about the statistics, the suicide statistics around the world.
Mm-hmm.
I see governmental conflict. I see toxic masculinity and the damage and the collateral damage that it does. And I realize that men need to heal too, that men need space to think and rethink themselves and their leadership too. And so I've become a fan of International Men's Day. I want to support it in any way that I can. But when it is about how do we help? My question about how do women support men is really about how do we help men, from your perspective, to make the shift to and to what? Make the shift to what?
So I think it's. So you're saying from the women's perspective. So what is kind of the Beavan? What's in it for me, for women?
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's, so we know that women typically have more emotional intelligence and more empathy, right? And that's where the struggle is, that we already see that already. So it's kind of like asking for more. I think it's really, and I've struggled with this, and I know that like my colleagues like Ray and Mark Green and stuff like that, they have this really wrapped up, and I still struggle with it because I think that it's, for women to support men, I think maybe it's being able to create that safe space to have a conversation around intent versus impact, right? And the challenge is that, women need to feel safe to do that. And that's a big risk. So part of my challenge is the struggle I have is I don't want to ask women to continually to put themselves at risk, right? And I know that even myself and the companies I interact with and the people I interact with, I know there are some times where people say, well, Rob, your intent doesn't match your impact. And I'm like, okay, please let me know. But they have to feel safe. And sometimes they may not feel safe, even though I may be more aware and be more open to speaking to this. That doesn't necessarily mean that makes everyone feel safe.
Yeah.
Right. Because then you also have intersectionality with it, right? Because you're talking about race, right? Sexual orientation, et cetera.
Yeah, because I was going to say that, I'm a Black woman. I remember when George Floyd died, and me and several of the people in my network had the same story. Everybody wanted to know our experience as Black women now. Everybody wanted to know how it felt to be a Black person, and, tell me your story. I'm here, I'm listening, I'm sending love and light to you. But it's not simple to just be recounting these stories, especially when nothing happens with them. So my question is, what's happening as men are being gifted insights about impact versus intent? What's happening around creating the shift with that data, especially now, International Men's Day?
It's freeing. I mean, I think that, and one of the things that there's some, Mark Green just coming out with a new relational book. And, he really talks about and gets into that freeing, like it's almost like an escape, because we have, as men, we have this anger built up. And it was interesting. I just read an anthropological piece a few months ago where they, where I think it was in Norway or somewhere, where they found the oldest Homo sapien ever, right? And they had thought they had died of sickness. And when they finally figured out what was going on, he was full of spear heads. So then it come up to this whole article around people saying that this is part of our DNA. We're warriors as part of our DNA. So how do we, and I think what we're seeing is, hopefully, we're seeing an evolution away from that. Right? If we look at the wars and everything that's been created, it's for the majority of it, right? It's around men, and it's finding different ways. So, like when you mentioned earlier about when the murder of George Floyd occurred here in the States, people came to you and said, "Oh, as a Black woman, I want to hear your story. Like, I want to know how this affected you. I want to learn more about what it's like to be a person of color."
Yeah,
that's not for you to describe, because you have your lived experiences, but it's also not the burden to put on you. So it's also not the burden for men to put on women, saying, what do we need to do differently?
Yeah.
We know what we need to do differently, right? What we need to start building is the muscle memory to start changing what we're doing. And it's not easy. Yeah. And it's not something that you'll be done with. It's kind of like when we talk about authentic leadership, executive circles, right? That's not something you're like, okay, I'm an executive or authentic leader, I'm done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's something that you always grow. And that's where when we talk about allyship or advocacy or anti-racism, I always put in training afterwards, because you're always going to be learning. Yeah. Right. And you're always going to be developing your own journey as you go along this.
I completely hear you. So tell us about what you're doing for International Men's Day, and what your vision is for men going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So International Men's Day. So we have the Better Man Conference. We have some amazing folks that are going to be speaking, and it's all around advocacy. Right. So this is where, I kind of talk about that ally in training or advocacy in training or something like that. And that's why I say put the in training, because I've seen a lot of men say that they're focused on allyship. But then they talk about how great they are and all the great achievements they've done. And that's not what it's about. It's about how have you created space, right, for others to be to have this conversation. So my thing is, I don't need to be in the limelight, right? There's enough of people that look like me in the limelight. It's how do I create space for people that don't look like me to have a voice, right? So then it's talking about I was asked to be on a panel a while ago, and it was all white men. And I said, no, I'm not, there's really no benefit to that, right? Even though it was around masculinity. So let's get some men of color in here, because they have a very different perspective than I do. Yeah. Right? One of the top 10 reasons, or one of the top 10 ways that I could be killed this year is not from a police officer, where in the United States, if I were Black, it would be.
Yeah.
right? So it's really about creating those spaces. And it was interesting when I was on a camp panel, I did a panel around women in the workplace for South by Southwest. And it was with 3 women of color. And at the end of it, they said, that was really good. You know, we really want to do more with you. And I was like, I'll do more in the behind the scenes, right? I don't need to be on stage. Well, no, but it was really, you said a lot of great things. I said, let me empower you. It's the same thing that we need to do to your story earlier. When the murder of George Floyd happened, a lot of executives called me up and said, hey, we need to talk to a Black consultant and have them talk to our company. And I'm like,
Yeah.
we can make that happen if you make them the CEO.
Yeah.
You're the leader of the company. Like, we'll support you in the background, but we're not going to tokenize any of this, right?
Yeah.
So it's creating that ability to not lean on the underinvested. So I like underinvested instead of underrepresented, because in the United States, women are 51%. They're not underrepresented; they're underinvested.
Yeah.
Right. If you look at the homelessness population, it's people of color which are disproportionately affected by that. So they're underinvested, right? So what we really want to do is we want to focus on how can we elevate the underinvested and create that level playing field. And one of the things that it was interesting, if we think about if for pay equity, like I can't get my head wrapped around if every spouse went up to their husband, if it was in a male-female relationship, and said, hey, would you be okay if I made an extra 10%, right, or 20%, or whatever that discrepancy is? How many of them would say no? Yet we're the ones that aren't allowing that to adjust.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So what you're saying really is that at Better Man this year, you're calling men to come into the place of being able to really take on some of these inequality issues and really champion change.
Right. Well, move from ally in training to advocacy or advocate in training.
Yeah.
Because the advocate is an ally in action. So it's great that we can have these conferences, that we can talk through this, but we need to give tools to sit down and say, okay, let's look at our pay equity.
Yeah.
Right. And the reality is that it's not just looking at the numbers, it's looking at the managerial structure that you have built up, because you'll have hidden pieces in there that you may not realize that won't come up on just a quantitative perspective, but looking at it from a qualitative perspective. We're looking at digging into the data, having focus groups, having conversations around this, right? We'll really start to open up where are the areas where inequality is rising, right? It's kind of like when we talk about equity versus equality, and if you think about it, if we gave everyone the same bike, that's great. But I'm a tall man, I'm 6'2", right? And say, and my spouse has to be 5'11", right? But if one of our children who's probably 5'8", they're not going to be able to ride the same bike. What we have to do is give a bike that's good for everybody. Right. And that's what we need to move towards, instead of just trying to put a box around everything.
Well, certainly, if Better Man has its way, then we'll generate enthusiasm amongst men to really take on some of these issues in higher ways, in advocacy, in true advocacy, and that's really, that we can't go wrong if that happens, because it's going to take all of us. So
absolutely,
like, hats off to you. A great initiative and a great mission. So if people want to find out about what's happening on Friday, is it open to men?
Anyone can join. I know I sent you the link, so anyone can join. I think they can find codes out there. It's like $79. And then we're going to be doing this next year. Our hope is working with a couple of our clients. We're going to be doing one, we're probably going to do hybrid. So we'll have a live conference, and we'll be doing it in London, and then one in New York and one in San Francisco next year. So it's really trying to help, touch upon different aspects, because also talking about patriarchy in Europe is very different than the United States. Same thing when we talk about race, right? There's different experiences. And so there's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
It's about having conversations and trying to be aware of, again, where that intent versus impact,
Yeah.
and to remove the shame from it,
Yeah.
right? Because that's, if I said something to you, Dion, and you were like, Rob, when you said X, that really didn't sit well with me,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to feel a little bit of shame, not as much as I would have 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
But then it's like, wow, so how could I have handled that differently?
Yeah.
Right. And this seeps into your personal life. I mean, everything that you do as a leader or as a man, as you're starting to work with, it starts to really perpetuate and create more of a semblance that's more impactful.
Yeah. Well, it's not linear. It's very complex, and
Right.
it's like you said, it's not just an event. It's something that we're going to have to be working out all of our lives, right the way through. So, I'm just saluting what you're doing right now. I've loved your work. I've learned from you when we speak. So I'm grateful for all.
Oh, I'm grateful for your time. I mean,
Yeah.
listen, I make mistakes all the time. I make mistakes every week,
Yeah.
even with doing this for 6 plus, almost 7 years.
Yeah.
I make mistakes all the time, and that'll never go away.
Yeah.
So it's being able to create that safe space. So it takes time.
Yeah.
So, but I think what you're doing, the work you're doing is so important, and it needs to be empowering, right? Women need to feel empowered. And it's a big town. I mean, you look all across the country, the world, I don't know, it was interesting. I was talking to my brother the other day, and he was saying how that, when we spent millions of dollars going into Africa and working and trying to get the mothers to get educated, to have them go to school. We built all these schools, everything like that. None of the mothers were coming there because they didn't look at the problem. They didn't ask, why, if we were to have a school, could you go? They didn't say, well, no, we can't, because we have to walk 4 miles each day to get 2 jugs of water, right? So instead of spending millions and millions of dollars on a school,
Yeah.
what if we spent tens of thousands of dollars on 5-gallon, or 25-gallon jugs that had wheels that you could just pull like a cart, and they don't have to go there once a week? Like, we're so hyper focused on the problem, we don't ask the people that the problem is affecting. We think we know the answers.
And that, I guess, is again, it's about really some of the big issues that we have to be talking about, especially at a time like this, International Men's Day, is this kind of identity, that there's deep-seated identity as saviors, leaders, on top, for the power dynamic that we have in our heads, whether we like it, yes or no, like this power dynamic that we know best, that we're on top, that we get to say how things go, that our way is the right way. And this is what I think in any International Men or International Women's Day events, things that need to be challenged are biases in the way that we see things, the way that we think things go, the way that we think things should be or are. This is what, at the end of the day, this is what's being challenged. I think it's why closing the inequality gap is so hard, is because of all these preconceived, very deeply held dynamic about who knows best. And so we've got a lot of work to do. There's no doubt it's complicated, and it's not linear, and it's going to take some time. We've got took us some time to get here. I think it's going to take us some time to get there. But
absolutely.
What does there look like for you?
Have you ever seen It's a Wonderful Life?
No, is that an old film?
Yeah, old film. It's basically about a gentleman that stays in the family business. It's a savings and loan and focus on the community. And he's very bitter because he was going to travel the world and keeps getting pulled back into the family business. So what happens is someone loses, like he's going to the bank, one of his uncle or something, and his uncle loses the cash. He puts it down because he was talking to someone, he picks it up, and then he didn't know where it went. And so he's going to lose everything. And then he looks at his life insurance policy and realizes that, if I do this, then it won't change. My family will be saved, like all this stuff. Yeah. So he's about to jump, and then an angel jumps into the water, and then George Bailey jumps in to save him. And anyway, so it's his guardian angel. And so George is like, well, maybe I should never have been born. And so it goes back and it shows, like, even though he thought he was insignificant, how impactful he was. Because if he hadn't been born, all this stuff would have happened.
Yeah.
So I use that as an example when I'm talking about to a lot of executives in America where this is a popular film for my generation, the 50s, should be an older, is it's around legacy. We care about what we're going to be remembered for. So by really focusing on legacy, like how amazing would it to be for every leader to start not working on just on the building the business, but what is the business's legacy? What is your legacy as a leader?
Yeah.
Right. So stop trying to figure out what it means to be a good leader and start acting like a good leader.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's being able to move through that. I just saw that in our country. So our government just passed this massive infrastructure bill, right? And and to the tune of $1.2 trillion or something like that.
Yeah.
And Mitch Landrieu, who was the mayor of New Orleans, is going to be in charge of that infrastructure. What I find fascinating about it is he wrote a book called In the Shadow of Statues. So in our country, we have statues that have some generals and stuff that were fought in the Civil War against, right? It would almost be maybe not as impactful as, Nazi Germany, but in Germany, you can't have a fight. You don't have a statue of Adolf Hitler, right? It's very similar kind of context of the Confederacy, the South fought and was basically, to make it easy, some for slavery or fought around that economic base, where the North didn't to some extent.
Yeah. And
so what happened was Wynton Marsalis, who's a famous musician, is friends with Mitch Landrieu and said to him one day, when are you taking down these statues? It's like, what are you talking about? That's our history. It's like, no, that's racism. He's like, what do you mean? It's not racism. That's right. He's like, no, as a Black man, I'm telling you, that's racism. So Mitch went on this journey. And at the end of it, he didn't say, I understand what Wynton was saying. I get it. No, he said, I had a transformative awareness. And that's it. So words, specific words, understanding versus awareness, right? So I can never understand what it's like to be in your shoes.
Yeah.
I might, through you sharing your lived experiences, I might start to have some awareness or some aha moments, right? But by saying, oh, Beavan, I understand how difficult it is. No.
Yeah.
I'll never be able to understand that. So again, words matter, and it's those small little steps, right? So we're not looking for leaders to spend 20 hours a week working on this. Take an hour a week, a minute here, 3 minutes there. Just start to build up that muscle memory that's been broken for so long.
Yeah. Well, awareness is a very powerful thing. Lots of things stem from becoming aware. A whole new world is available in the light of awareness. So I'm just really hopeful that people leave your event more aware, aware of who they are and the part that they're going to be playing, the importance of the part that they play in transforming outcomes wherever they are.
Right. Yeah. No, it's like you said earlier, it's a lot of it's about power. So power doesn't have to be a negative thing. Like, we got to talk about power as a negative thing. You can have the power to drive positive change without having the full control, so to speak. So it doesn't have to be that negative dynamic, right? It can actually be a positive dynamic. I mean, there's so many different ways to approach this.
I think
there's so many different
what
things.
You're saying about the difference between allyship and advocacy is really the core of what I'm hearing you say today. I think it is about, rather than using power to self-aggrandize, like using power to create shifts and to drive change that's meaningful for more than just you. I think that's what we're really talking about here today, is that it keeps coming back to seek understanding, seek awareness, but then what are you going to do with that when you get there? And it's about standing up and taking responsibility for what you do with that when you move forward.
Right. Yeah, to your point earlier where you said, what does it feel like? I mean, when have you, imagine walking up to someone on the street and they're in a car accident and you offer your jacket they look at you like, thank you so much. I just like, to be simple as that. Imagine how good that feels,
Yeah.
right? No one's going to feel bad about that. So now imagine being able to feel that more and more.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's the goal. So that's the feeling that happens when you start to break down the man box culture.
Yeah.
And you're able to start seeing the dynamic changes around you. So it's really freeing.
Yeah.
I mean, we're really, we're in our heads, we're tied up around this man box culture and the patriarchy. And it's not about, you see right now, and I can't speak for outside the US, but I see the States, like, we need to own our masculinity, we need to take back our wives and do all, and it's just macho, like, that's not it. Like, you're trying to hold on to the past, and we need to move forward because we're evolving as a species.
Yeah. Agreed. I mean, I'm always wondering whether I need to ask, if this question's just come up about what the definition of masculinity is in your eyes.
So, I mean, it depends. So that's another struggle, right? Because it's always been ingrained in power, right? Being able to show that your family, you can protect them and be safe for them, right? But you look at time and time again in the history, like, women, mothers, right? I mean, I know that in the States, I've seen when we had a lot of the things happen around after the murder of George Floyd, we saw a lot of women, women of color that were in their 70s or 80s walking right up to, like, you don't mess with them.
Yeah.
Right? They're just like, you're not coming on my property. You're not, like, there's the matriarchal is still there to some extent.
Yeah.
Right? It's just kind of hidden below. So to define masculinity is a difficult thing, because I think it really, there is no clear definition because we don't know what it is yet, right? If you look at how it was in the past, it's based around power and forthright and honor and all these things, right? Yet, what do? We send for our country, we send our veterans over, our soldiers over to fight wars, and then don't support them when they come back.
That's why,
right? I mean,
we've had this conversation before, like, that's why, in my thinking, it's not really the patriarchy that's the problem. It's this kind of misuse of the patriarchy.
Correct.
That's the problem.
Well said.
So it's so there is nothing wrong with protection and honor and all those things that you described, this kind of masculine description that is nurturing in its own way, that is caring and loving in its own way. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I know that for many women, that the issues in their life is as a direct result of a lack of that masculinity in their life, in their growth. But it's when it starts to become like one-upmanship games, nation against nation, cowboys and Indians, fighting over this land and that land, instead of what it's really supposed to be about, which is protection and providing space for the expression of the feminine. Like, I think that's, for me,
I really like that.
Yeah.
So I really like the fact that it's not. That's really intriguing. So it's not about taking down the patriarchy. It's about redefining patriarchy.
Yeah,
we still want to have that.
For me, I see this global cry to dismantle patriarchy. I say heal patriarchy and make it strong. I say make it meaningful, make it bring it back to the original intention of it, which is to raise families that are strong and expressive and
that's fascinating
and meaningful in the world.
Well, and that ties back to when I was talking about the 300, right? He's as the king,
exactly.
He's building warriors.
Yeah.
But the woman is producing warriors. They're equals. They're both equal. So that's the healthy patriarchy.
Well, I think it was in one of our conversations that you sent me to that film. I haven't watched the whole film yet, but I tell you, I saw some clips from that film, and the Queen, the Queen. I show it to my clients now because I just love how they both. That film is a perfect picture, I think, of the masculine and the feminine, men and women partnering to bring health and well-being to their domain. And, I think at the end of the day, that's what I'd love. That's what I'm working to reestablish. Yeah.
Well, I love that. And that ties into we can have healthy patriarchy, healthy matriarchy, and have them be equal, right? So instead of taking down patriarchy, it's how do we create a healthy patriarchy, right? So redefining masculinity. Absolutely. Yeah. I love that.
So I'm hoping that's what we'll all be up to on International Men's Day, is really helping the masculine to heal so that we can get back to balance and we can get back to partnership. I remember having a dream once. I don't know if it was a dream. I wasn't really sleeping. I was awake, but I got carried away in this kind of vision. And I saw this man. He was a really top, when people talk about the patriarchy, it's usually his picture, this white man in a suit with white hair. And, he was talking to his board and he was saying, we're going to do this and we're going to take that territory and we're going to do this and we're going to build that and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And then he said, but every time he said what they were going to do, he said, oh, but first of all, let me talk to my wife about that. And then he'd say, we're going to do this. And he'd say, but first of all, let me talk to my wife about that. And then he'd keep saying these things and then say, let me talk to my wife about that. And then I got in this vision, I said to him, why'd you keep saying that? Why'd you keep saying, and let me talk to my wife about that? And he said, oh my God, I've learned the long and hard way. He said, I see all these things and I have all these ideas about what territory we're going to take. But when I speak to her, she just seems to have this superpower to be able to see the effect of if we go like that. She gets to see what will happen if what will happen over here if we do that over there. She kind of gets to see she sees in the invisible realm how things will impact each other and what the outcome will really be if we go down that route. And so he said, I've learned the hard way. He said to me, he said, Dion, I've learned the hard way. I don't do anything without talking to her first. And I woke up from that really curious about, what was that about? And I realized it's like the play between the masculine and the feminine, and that we need both. We need both in order to create something that's sturdy and can stand the test of time and everybody and have the greater good at its core. So
I love that. That's fascinating. Yeah, no, I love that. It's going back to that diversity of thought, right? It's a different perspective.
Yeah.
We're seeing it through one lens.
Yeah.
Like with the work that I do and working with my colleagues, I'm like, hey, I really want to do this. I'm all excited about it. Maybe I spent the weekend working on it. And they're like, yeah, but what about this, this, and this? And I'm like, oh, okay, you're right. That's a really good idea. Like I've learned to not jump into an idea and start building the whole thing out until I have a conversation with our team and say, okay, so folks, what do you think? Like, this is what I'm thinking. And there's some times where like, oh, Rob, that's a great idea. And I'm like, oh, good. But there are times where like, well, why don't we do it this way? Like someone just emailed me, asked me the other day, like, Rob, why are you getting these emails and then forwarding them to me?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I don't know. I've been doing that for the last 3 years. Should I not be doing that? Like, what should I like? And it's not about, Rob, you shouldn't be doing this. It's just why, like, what are the process looks like? Exactly. And this is whether it's personal life or, within business world. So no, I really like that. Let me see what my wife would say. That's awesome.
As usual, I knew it'd be good to talk to you, and it's good.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it really is always a pleasure, and it's good to touch base with you and see how you're doing. Looks like life's treating you well.
It's busy. Yeah, doing college tours for our youngest, so we'll soon be empty nesters. So, wow. But yeah, it's going well. I'm excited to look at how we can. So after the holidays kind of